Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Akos. I'm the host of Airtime Webinars, which is a series of discussions with research and product leaders about the nitty-gritty details of building products. Today, I have the honor and pleasure of talking to Nina Weber about how to make insights impactful. Now, what you need to know about Nina is that she is one of the co-founders of Astrolabium, which I label as a boutique training and coaching agency for UX and tech professionals. Nina, you may have a better description of that. I'll give you the mic in a minute. Just bear with me. What is also important about Nina is that she's a seasoned UX researcher. I think you're one of the most experienced researchers that I talked to. She worked 18 years at Google, where she had the opportunity to work on products like Google Play, Google Cloud Platform, or YouTube ads. And Nina, it's an honor to have you here. And I just want to throw the ball in your direction straight away and ask you to say a few things about like 18 years Google and then launching your own thing. What have you been working on and what are you up to in the future?
Thank you so much for having me, Akash. I'm really, really happy and honored myself to be here. 18 years at Google. So I'm originally a sociologist, and I came out of uni with the option to either get a taxi license or to do market research, which at that time wasn't really super tempting for me. So I applied to actually an ad in a newspaper with Google back in 2005 and
Wow.
Joined their brand new EMEA customer support team in early 2006. Not as a UXer, but doing a lot of things that afterwards I would label as UX adjacent, so looking into actually how we could improve our support products, our support systems to give better, more speedy, more tailored support to our users of free products, and also on how to scale that up with like a lot of people coming in. At the beginning, I actually was sitting there writing email one-to-one, and people had to wait for weeks to get a reply to their action and to their question. And we actually managed to introduce a system where we used other users in forums that would help us give really high quality responses. Wow. So that was kind of like my first dip into UX back then. And I moved into more of an analyst role later during that time, which was actually in Dublin in Ireland, and looked into crunching numbers and kind of doing stuff that I would now describe as quant UX on a surface level. Though I'm okay with stats, but not super strong, and it's definitely not my passion. And then I realized that I was kind of at the wrong end of the product cycle with that. I heard about the same issues that our products had over and over again, and I got antsy about like joining the team earlier in the stage and actually doing something about creating better products. So in 2009, I think I went back to uni and studied human-computer interaction design here in Switzerland, which was really helpful also because it gave me the opportunity to kind of network here and to introduce myself to what was back then the UX EMEA team, and to create a role for myself there as Google's actually first ever research assistant.
Wow. Why? I wasn't aware of this.
Yeah, it didn't exist before. We kind of tried it out because I wasn't done with my studies yet. So it was kind of like a compromise, and it worked so well that it became something that now all of the teams in Google actually have, and that's just a standard. So I'm pretty proud of having been a part of creating that.
Yeah. Yeah, let's fast forward a little bit to last year with your dear ex-colleague Javier. You two decided to launch something new. Could you say a few words about that? What's that? What is Astrolabium? Where are you taking it?
I actually like the boutique label. So I'm talking about it as a studio for UX
Okay.
training and career coaching. So we work with people in tech. We work with people specifically in UX and UXR, either one-on-one coaching for them, all topics from like how to handle a specific problem to understanding better what the next steps in my career are, to actually I'm out of a job right now, or I'm looking to find my next position, and doing very tactical stuff around helping people get their applications in order and practicing interviewing, etc.
Got that. Now, Nina, the topic of the day is from insight to impact, which is a really good punchline. I love that. But before we go to the essence, to the core today, I would like you to think back a little bit on your career, and I was wondering if you had like any pivotal experiences, some profound experiences during your career when you noticed that you put all this work into the qualitative project. You have all these insights, but you fail to convert, or not necessarily you, but these insights fail to convert into impact. And I'd love to hear a couple of examples if you have in the past, and what you learned from them.
I definitely have a couple of them, but like my favorite example is like this complete can I swear shit show of a project that was one of the first that I actually did after converting from a research assistant to a full UXR. And I was working on what was then the emerging markets team in Google. We were working on different products, all from kind of like an angle of like how can we make those products work better for people in countries where we are not facing the same market conditions as we are in the US and EMEA. And so we went and created kind of like this super amazing research plan that was happening in like 4 different locations in southern and southeastern Asia. We had 5 people traveling for extended periods of times, 5 researchers. We worked with local agencies to kind of like get sessions translated, etc. We met with users and we asked them all of those questions. And after the second interview that I was sitting in Thailand, I realized our script is complete bollocks. Like our research questions don't make any sense at all. Like we went through them, we kind of like tried to adjust, but really the focus of our research was not really well like defined, or like not really matching what we were observing there. We kind of like went from those assumptions that we had from previous research that had happened in sub-Saharan Africa, and because all of that to us was emerging markets, we just assumed they would have the same problems. And we went in, we found a completely different market, completely different users, completely different problems as well, and none of the things that we asked was really valuable. We came back, we wrote extensive reports, we shared those reports. We kind of like tried to set up meetings and kind of like presentations with stakeholders. Some of them came politely, but there wasn't really a lot of interest. And in the end, none of the things that we found had any relevance. The reports were not quoted in anything, and they were not used for anything. We couldn't really give good recommendations either. So it was a complete waste of money and time. Really, really expensive research that had 0 impact. So that was back then just really embarrassing. But later I really loved going back to that example, because it's a prototypical example of like everything that you could do wrong that we did wrong back then. If you wanted to maximize for not having impact, or if you wanted to optimize for not having impact, you should have followed all of our steps to the letter.
Yeah. Now, the reason I resonate with this story and I really like it is because when I just like until 2 minutes ago, when I thought about impact, I thought like, okay, I have these amazing insights, and then how do I deliver them in an impactful way? And that's your window of opportunity to create impact for an insight. But what I'm hearing from you is that actually to have impact down the line, it starts in the very first step of planning your research and
Yeah.
writing your discussion guide. And how well that is written, it propagates through the entire process and can have this devastating limit of impact or lack of impact in the end.
It's not only about how well it is written, it is how relevant it is, right? You can have a super nicely defined research program, and actually we did back then, right? Like we had fantastic, we had a really good setup. We had like really well written questions and scripts for the interviews. We had really well fitting people that we invited, but the step that we failed to do was to make sure that during prioritization we actually looked at how we define priority, like how we define impact. And to me, the definition of impact is, do you in the end make a difference to the product? Do your insights, are they being used to shape what happens with the product? And for that, obviously, you need to know, where's the product at? Who are the partners and the stakeholders that you're actually working with, and what do they need? So the very first step of prioritization is actually to understand the business, to understand what the product is and what we're trying to achieve. And then you have 6 stages in the user research lifecycle, which are prioritization, planning, execution of the research, analysis of the research, reporting, and then follow through. And at each of those stages, you need to make sure that you connect back to those product goals, to those business goals,
Yeah.
in order to land somewhere where your insights actually are useful and actionable
Yeah,
for your
yeah.
partners.
I'd like to double tap first on the prioritization, but before we do that,
Mhm.
since you mentioned impact, I want to grab a question from Hamza from the audience, who's asking if you used any sort of metrics to measure that your insights had a real impact.
Yeah. So it very much depends on the project. In the end, it can be something like, was research quoted in a PRD, in a product requirements document, for example. It can be like, how much follow-up was there with stakeholders. For something like a usability test, it could be something like, how many bugs did you find, and how many of those were actually resolved after time X. Those are very measurable, very quantifiable metrics. But for most research, especially strategic research, it's softer stuff. It's like, am I being quoted? Does my research, is it still looked at and used as the basis for discussions? Are those questions or those insights and recommendations not just acted on, but also discussed in strategy meetings, for example? And ultimately, it's measurable in the standing of UX in an organization. Do we get pulled into strategic discussions early on, or are we just an afterthought and we get to test whatever the rest of the product team has developed? So that's a very good measure, I guess, of like how much impact UXR has in general.
Absolutely. Let's go back to the prioritization, because it touches on how you pick projects, research projects that are relevant for the business. Do you have a mental model for that, or a framework that you like using when you need to pick the research projects that you focus on?
So it's more of a process than a framework
Okay.
for like there are different frameworks that you can use for prioritization, but I think the process is what is really important. Like the having a form of intake where you understand where the team is at, what the questions are that they are considering, or what the assumptions are. And that's more likely the case, right? Oftentimes they don't even know they should be asking questions, or they should think about it in terms of research questions. So it's more about like testing what assumptions does the team have, what plans do they have, and how can we help them move forward with more confidence and avoid them falling into whatever comes with basing your decisions on false.
Do you have like a stringent methodology to collect these data points, or do you collect them from coffee, kitchen discussions or on the corridor? How do you pick them up?
In an ideal case, it's a combination of both. So we, in past teams, we usually had intake forms where we asked our cross-functional partners to submit whatever they thought was important to work on. And then we would also, obviously, in conversations, track what we thought was coming up as important over and over again. And we would kind of like put that really into a spreadsheet where we had information about like what the goal was, the information about the stakeholders and the stakeholder teams, the partner teams, what efforts and projects on the product side those were related to, what OKRs and key results the research would inform. And then also information about like just t-shirt sizing, how big of a project that was going to be, how much effort, how much time of a UXR that was going to require, and information about like what's the last date that this needs to actually be delivered to still be useful to the product team. And from all of that, we would then have several rounds of discussions. So prioritization is always iterative, right? So we would have several rounds of discussions with our stakeholders to understand better what the highest impact projects are, and kind of like get to a red line where we could say, okay, these are the resources that we have in terms of people hours in this time that we're looking at. Usually we did it quarterly. So this is what we propose we do. This is the red line. So all of the other projects that are underneath the red line, we're not going to work on them. And then obviously people would come back and say, no, but like my project fell under the line. That's not possible. Like we absolutely have to work on that. And then we would kind of like force this discussion across different areas, across different PMs and eng teams to say, okay, like if we look at it again from a higher level perspective, do we all agree that these are the priorities, or do we need to change something and move something that is actually under the red line now up? And at what cost? What does it mean for the stuff that's above the line right now? Because obviously, if we take something out, something else needs to fall.
Yeah. It almost sounds like a road mapping exercise. No,
it's very similar. So the idea with both is that you have alignment on what the priorities are, right? That you actually have broad agreement on what you do and what you don't do, and that's the key piece of prioritization. Like not just understanding what would be good to have, but also what we agree we're not going to do right now because the other stuff is more important.
Got that. Now, let's assume you did a good job. I'm sure you did. So you, as a hypothetical, you in this case, and you have this list of a research project that you'll be working on, and then come the subsequent steps. You said I think you said planning, you said execution, analysis. Let's stick to that part, like planning, execution, analysis. Based on your experience, what are the levers to get high impact down the line in this phase of research projects?
So usually the problem is not the quality of the execution or of the data intake, right? Like specifically in those two phases, assuming that you did a good job up front, like you are working on the right things, and during planning you ensured that you're working on the right things in the right way. You've picked the right methodology, you've picked the right users to participate in the research. All of that is going well. The biggest risks in those phases for impact are that you are kind of losing momentum in terms of interest on your partner and stakeholder side, right? That you just go out and you do your stuff, and stakeholders forget that this is happening and they move on without waiting for your results.
Even though they asked for it, right?
Even though they asked for it, like
right.
In an ideal case, you have been very clear during the planning phase about like what you're going to do and how long it takes, right? And you have agreement that you're only going to work on this if they commit to use your results as well, because otherwise you could have moved them below, like if they're not waiting for it anyways. And that's also why we have the last date or end date by when the results needs to be in for the research to make sense. However, like we all know those people who are very trigger happy, and we especially in Google, like PMs were very much hired for their drive and for their impatience. So the risk is always like if you don't keep them engaged, you risk them going ahead without you. B, you also risk them not being as bought into what you're doing as if you keep them engaged during that phase. So I like to look at it more positively. Like to me, execution and analysis are fantastic opportunities to create a stronger bond between non-UX stakeholders and your users, and UX as a function as well, right? We call it moments of empathy. Like if you're able to actually not just keep a stakeholder interested during that phase, but have them actively engaged with your research, actively observing, for example, or even assisting in research, and then not just seeing users interacting with the product or doing like going through certain scenarios that are relevant for the product development, but being able to also interact with them. Those are super strong moments that they are never going to forget. And the side effect is also they are going to feel a sense of co-ownership with the research and the research insights, right? So if you get them to, and that's something that's tricky because you want to strike a balance between like kind of like making sure that they can do their job. So research takes time, being involved in research, observing, all of that takes time. But kind of like finding the right ways to incentivize them to at least be part of some part of the research. That is something that is invaluable for them because it teaches them about users in a way that you can't with a report. You can't with kind of like explaining it. The difference also between like themselves and a user, between a user and another user, that's something, I mean, we all know that from our own experience as well. The first time you observe this kind of stuff is super strong. But then also by doing that, you're going to have somebody who's in your court when it comes to broadcasting your findings, about backing up your findings. Those people are much more likely to share with other people that this has happened and to kind of like be bought into this being the right way to going about this than somebody who's just like a passive observer.
So
go ahead.
Engagement. It's like location for restaurants. And in this case, it's engagement.
The same is true for analysis, right? Like if you can use their brains, their brain power, and their contributions for analysis, for like understanding, seeing the patterns, and kind of like defining where you want to focus more, you're going to get better quality in your analysis, because you have different perspectives on the data, but you're also going to get better quality recommendations, because you can in the moment check already, does that actually make sense? Like my recommendation from a UX perspective, does that recommendation make sense from a business, from a product, from an engineering perspective as well? So it's both great, because the report is more likely to be seen and be listened to and be trusted, but it also makes sense because the quality of the report increases, and that again makes it more likely for the research to have impact and to be used.
When I think about engaging with stakeholders in these phases, I think about inviting PMs as observers to interviews. I think about an affinity mapping workshop that we do together. It's all like the thoughts that I typically have are high investment in terms of time and attention that is required from my stakeholders. Do you like what sort of other ways do you have to engage with stakeholders, and maybe requiring less effort on their side, but still keeping them in the loop and keeping them in the process?
That's a super important piece there, also to understand the segments of stakeholders that you have, right? Like you're going to have those very engaged ones that are willing to come along, to observe, to kind of like debrief with you and do all of that stuff and commit that time. But you're also going to have the people who just don't have time for that, or aren't as interested yet. They might fall into the first segment later, further down the line, once you've convinced them more. But in the moment, you need to keep them engaged, but do it in a more light way. And so something that is super key is similar to what we're doing on LinkedIn, right? Like to show our heads frequently and to say, well, this is still going on. Here's a tidbit that I learned today, right? Just like maybe through your chat channels, through email, through whatever, send out quotes of the day, for example, if you're in user sessions all day, and say, well, today, this is actually something that stuck with me, a user quote or a quick, I don't want to call it insight, because obviously we're not at the phase of like having created insights yet, but like just something that's kind of a nugget, we call them sometimes. We had different processes.
A key moment.
Exactly, a key moment. We had a team in my last team that went to do research with users in Japan, and obviously they had a couple of PMs and Eng folks that tagged along that were able to commit that kind of time. But to keep the rest of the product team engaged, they had this really cool format that they called postcards from the field. So they would send out like images of like the user visits that they were doing there. And just like a brief introduction or like something that came up in the session with that particular user about like that kind of like sparked curiosity on the side of the people, and reminded them, hey, this is still going on. You're going to see more about this soon, just so it didn't fall out of their heads, but had kind of like a presence there.
So last thing, Nina, from my side, all right. You did all that project, and now you're at the reporting stage where you're delivering. I guess you must have picked up and seen nuances of what sort of delivery methods lead to better impact. What do you have some silver bullets when it comes to reporting? And I know I'm asking for a lot with silver bullets, but maybe some tricks that you picked up along the way.
I'm going to give you a typical user research answer, right? It completely depends. There's no silver bullet.
My lawyer tells me the same thing. It's whatever I ask.
So it goes really back to the very foundations of like, you need to know who your stakeholders, who your partners are. You need to understand how they tick, what they need, and what their preferences are. So kind of like getting that understanding of who you're working with is super important throughout all of the phases. If you want to incentivize them to be more active in your research, it really helps knowing like what preferences they have, what is valuable to them, so you can create those incentives. And the same goes for reporting. I've had projects where we created super involved deliverables, like series of different things to come, because we knew that was something that team kind of like digged, like they really appreciated that. They were really looking for that. And I had projects, really long projects also, where I went with literally a spreadsheet into a conversation, because I knew the engineering manager on that team kind of like had this bias against polished stuff. So his thing with even just like a presentation was like, if you spend time on a presentation, that's wasteful. Like, we're waiting for the results. So I sometimes went in and actually did a presentation just to kind of like structure the story for myself. And then I used the spreadsheet, or even created,
you deconstructed it into a spreadsheet
to show kind of like the raw data, and just have a conversation about my insights based on what they were seeing in the spreadsheet. So it really, really depends on the context of the team, the preferences of the stakeholders or the partners, and obviously also the timeline. But what is really important is that whatever you deliver is actionable, it's timely, and it's clear. And clarity also means, in most of the cases, brevity, right? Like, you need to focus on the top things that you want to deliver, and be brave enough to kind of like cut out all of the rest. If I go back to that very failed project that we had, we created a report that was 80 pages long, a Word document, and obviously nobody read that, right? So my best reports are actually super short ones, but it's very clear. Like, these are the things that I recommend happening, and then after that, this is what this is based on. This is the insight, this is the observation, and this is what it means. That's very important, kind of like translating that, but then having a very high level, kind of like, this is what I recommend we do. Come talk to me about the details. And very often what we see in reports is actually a lot about the methodology, a lot about like the details that nobody outside of UXR has time or interest looking into, and when we're losing interest, we're losing momentum by including that.
Yeah, let me just pick. There's like a bunch of questions that appeared in the comments. So let's use this. I'm gonna go through randomly here. A question from Winter is, what is your advice on building and promoting research culture in a company that undervalues research, tying a little bit into what you've been covering right now?
Yeah, that's a very classic problem, right? Like something that most of us were faced with at some point. And so there's, again, no quick fix to this. The solution to this is, you can't ask for trust to be handed out to you. So you need to earn that. And so, again, going and doing the legwork, like figuring out who the partners on the product side are, the potential partners maybe at that point as well, what they are struggling with, what they assume and are maybe not super certain about. Understanding that is going to give you kind of like something to work with, and to figure out ways to create value for them. So that's the route, right? Like, you need to build trust, and the way to build trust is like, do something that actually benefits them, either in their personal kind of like agenda to get to the next promo, or with regards to what their team is working on. And then also, when you work with stakeholders, look for likely allies. So look for, I call them the stakeholders of least resistance, who might not be super fans of UX right now, because maybe they just don't have experience with UX yet, but they are open, and they are probably easier targets to work with, and to kind of like establish that trust, right?
Yeah.
they are going to be proponents of UX, and it's going to be something that's kind of like not a vicious circle, but the opposite.
Virtuous, a virtuous circle.
Virtuous. Thank you.
This reminds me a little bit to the technological adoption graph. You know that there's always like these early adopters and innovators, small portion of society that try to, and then you have to sort of say conquer them. You have to win them for your product, and your product in this case is the research outputs that you produce, in order to tackle the mass market later on, which are people in the company who feel more distanced from research and seem less interested.
Yeah. And I think the people part is super important, like the remembering that those roles, those functions, they are people, they are human beings that operate the same as we do, right? They don't have it figured out 100%. Oftentimes they wing it just like we do. And they have, they're scared of failing. They are scared of being found out. So that is kind of like your lever, figuring out what they are afraid of and helping them prevent that. That's going to ensure having trust and having them appreciate UX and UXR much more than they might be doing in this situation where you're right now.
Yeah. I have a question from Heidi about what happens after your recommendations have been presented. Do you drop the pen and just go to the next project and say good luck, or is it something more?
I did in the past, and I think that that's a huge misconception that research ends with the report, right? If you remember the 6 stages, stage 6 for me is actually the follow through, and that means you do follow up with the people that should be acting on the recommendations. That obviously goes back to the beginning, where you need to figure out who are actually the stakeholders, the partners, the different teams that are connected to the project. So you can actually assign an owner to a recommendation. Assign sounds very formal, but like in your mind, even if you don't have the authority to assign it, this is what you're doing. You know, this is something that person X in team Y needs to handle, and you set yourself frequent reminders to check in with them and see if they're doing that. One thing about reporting is also that even if your message is clear and actionable and all of that, it needs to be repeated over again, right? So this is something that you need to factor in to research planning already, that like once the report is out, the next stage begins, and that still requires your time, not as much as in the beginning, but like the follow through, the repeat messaging, that's something that needs to happen for quite some time afterwards. If you just drop the report, no matter how good your recommendations are, people are not as likely to act on them as if you are the advocate for your recommendations after the project has been finished as well.
Yeah, I think this also, this is a wisdom I'm going to quote the wrong way for sure. But when you make a good presentation, one of the piece of wisdoms to go by is to tell people what you're going to tell them, tell your main message, and then recap, tell them what you told them in the end. Yeah. It's exactly this repetition to hammer in your main messages and points.
Exactly. And then also speaking their language and using their tools is really important for this. So using the right words to kind of like make them understand why this is important and what you're exactly expecting of them. That requires you to understand the business better, and that is something that all people in UX should really put on their agenda to get better at speaking business. And then also with regards to using their systems. So if you, again, go back to understanding your stakeholders and how they operate, right? You can see what what systems, what tools they're using in the moment to track their productivity. And so at Google, for example, we had a system called Buganizer, where engineers tracked all of the different things that they needed to work on, and they had a status. And like if a bug stayed open and unresolved for too long, that would have consequences. So when we actually understood on the UX side that they had this tool, we started putting our recommendations in forms of bugs into those systems as well, which had the benefit of like somebody being on it. And even if that was the wrong person, they had to reassign it to somebody else, and it existed. Like it couldn't just fall off the table as easily anymore. Obviously, that works better for results of a usability test than something that is more of a foundational insight. But the same thing holds true for them. Like you need to understand how they track impact, how they track productivity, and then feed into that.
Yeah. Another question from Hamza is whether you had at Google a particular research methodologies that just consistently delivered better or higher impact results.
So obviously, another UXR response here, it very much depends. I mean, with regards to impact, with regards to creating the best, the most robust results, obviously you need to take the methodology that fits the research question best. And oftentimes there are several different that you can pick. But if you go with the wrong methodology, you're guaranteed not to have impact. But then obviously there's also a different part. And like you heard me talk about like creating impact, going back to relationships and communication with stakeholders and to storytelling and to engaging them. And then obviously there are methodologies that are more engaging and others that are less engaging. So for example, if you have field research and you manage to take cross-functional stakeholders along, that is guaranteed to have a lasting impact on how they view UX and UXR, just because it's so much of an experience, right? Interviews are definitely less easy to follow, just because they take a longer time than, for example, a usability study where you see somebody interacting with something that you know as an engineer or a PM from a different perspective, for example. So that's also something to take into consideration. What is the needle that you actually want to move? What is the metric that you want to impact? With pure impact, pick obviously just methodologies that make sense. With pure robustness in mind, only pick methodologies that make sense for the research question. But then if in addition you want to be more engaging, have that in mind. Like how is it going to be for cross-functional stakeholders to observe that, or also to read the results. So I also had stakeholders who were super happy always when we had quantifiable stuff. So I would always make sure to have that kind of like in the mix as well, either trying to figure out how I could include a survey or a logs analysis or something like that, if it made sense for the research question, obviously.
Yeah, talking about field trips, one of the questions targets exactly this point. And the question is about when would you usually spend a day observing clients versus basic question answer meetings, i.e. interviews?
Yeah. So personally, I would try, and not maybe a full day, but like at least sometime. I would always try to do that when I joined a new team. Not so much for research that I produced for the team, but for me to get a better understanding of who am I dealing with here. And then as a methodology observation is really great if you're in early stages of product development, when you're trying to understand what is actually the space that the user is in, what are they doing right now to solve certain situations, how do they work with other tools? How do they go maybe also through a sequence of different tools to accomplish something? What is really painful for them? What do they not even notice that they're doing right now? All of that kind of stuff is useful, most useful when you still have kind of like an open slate of like developing different things for that. But then also, again, really for yourself to acquaint yourself with who the people are that you should keep in mind when you're doing your day-to-day job, like why you care, why it is important that you're going through all the motions that are so important, why it is important for you to actually have impact with your research, because ultimately, if you do the right kind of research, you're helping exactly those people, and just meeting them and seeing them in their natural habitat is really powerful as a reminder.
So a question from Sai about holding people accountable once action items are decided. I think that's it feels like thin ice. No, like how do you tread on that thin ice to be not annoying, but at the same time make sure that those action items that you discussed with PMs are acted on?
Yeah. So I think that is with every situation, right, where you don't have formal authority, but you're kind of like working in a team. It's important to, again, understand who that stakeholder is, who that partner is, how they tick, and what is important to them. And then understand and remind yourself that this is actually a partner, right? You have a common goal. And then remind that person about that common goal. Like, make them understand why it is that you care that this particular thing is being acted on, but with kind of like a mindset of curiosity and partnership, and openness, and kind of like really understanding why it is that they are not acting on it. Is there a blocker maybe? Is it not highly enough prioritized? And then help them understand your perspective and maybe help them work through getting that reprioritized if that is a blocker. So sometimes it requires like a broader conversation, maybe with other partners on adjacent teams, or with the manager of a person, not over their head, but like with them included, maybe about like this has been deprioritized, but we should reconsider that prioritization. I actually think this is a super important thing. It's not being acted on, and those are the consequences. And formulating the consequences again in a way that it clearly touches on what it is that they care about, so that they can make better decisions. And sometimes it's also like, maybe it is not as important, right? It's going in with this curiosity, and with a mindset of like, we are all professionals, we all want to do the best we can. Sometimes that also means understanding, I think this is a top priority, but there are valid reasons for why this is not being acted on. And then I just have to be patient and keep reminding them and hope that at some point it becomes more of a priority. But it's definitely also data that I can take back and improve my recommendations and the way that I assign stuff in the next round.
Got that. I have a really good one from Tatiana about the most interesting project you had, if you had to pick one.
I had a couple of really rewarding ones because they were connected to nice travel. But the one that I'm still most proud of, or that I really feel had really profound impact, was actually one that I did in one of my first jobs with YouTube ads, where we went in with we actually started a project that was very tactical, and it kind of like kicked up this question about like, are those assumptions that we have about who our users are really right? And it led to kind of like this. It was first a side project where we just included more questions in other research that we were doing about who the users are. And it led to conversations with our internal sales team and reaching out to more teams that became partner teams that we didn't really have on our radar back then. And over time, it kind of like it had a really profound impact in the way that this team is now working with internal and external stakeholders, because we realized that we had completely oversimplified how we talked about users. We kind of like had two categories of users. And in the end, I was able with my design partner to create this visual map of the user space that we called the advertiser universe. Which kind of like looked like a star map, and it was a really beautiful visual that this person created that is still up on walls in different offices after, I don't know, almost 10 years, I guess. It's still relevant.
Wow.
It's still beautiful. And that was just something super interesting to me, because it was kind of like this side quest thing that developed into something that was super rewarding, because nobody had thought about our users in that way. And it led to a really deep knowledge on the side of all of the stakeholders and all of the partners on the product team, but also to relationships in-house that didn't exist before, and that changed completely how we're working, how that team is working until today, how they're developing product.
It sounds to me that you stumbled upon something that I would label as an unknown thing, something that you didn't know you should be looking into, but you sort of happened to open that lid, and what came out as a much more profound understanding and a nuanced understanding of your customers, which had a major impact across the board for all the teams.
It was gold. And that obviously had a huge impact also on the role that UX played in that product team afterwards, from like a team that was respected but always pulled in way too late to an equal partner in strategy discussions.
Yeah. Now, do you have a piece of advice for people who are UX researchers and join a new company?
So your area obviously are the users, so you need to expose yourself to the users really early on. Like, again, go in there with humility and with curiosity and openness to not know anything, and to just learn. Like, don't have expectations against yourself to kind of like understand what you can't understand, but really listen to the users. And then at the same time, learn about the business and your stakeholders. Understand who your stakeholders are, who your most likely partners are, who the people are that maybe have bad experiences with UX and have biases, so you know how to handle them. Understand who the stakeholders of least resistance are, that you are more likely to win over and work with. And then learn their language, understand what they care about, understand at least the basics of the business, so that you can actually talk in a language with words that are meaningful to them, and translate your insights into something that actually screams act on me to the user, rather than something about, I don't know, UX terminology, blah, 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 that they listen to and go, well, nice, but so what? The so what is always connected to what they care about. That's really important.
Yeah. Very last question from Yash about deciding to close your chapter at Google. Like, you worked there for a long time. It must have been an important decision, something that you pondered about for a while. And then again, it's not just closing, but opening a new chapter, which I guess had the pool effect. Could you share your journey?
Yeah. So actually, it during the pandemic, I started doing a formal training in coaching, and coaching was something that, as a manager in Google, I really enjoyed. And I didn't mention that before, but like I have always been oscillating between managerial and IC roles, so individual contributor roles where I was doing more research. And when I did more project work, more IC work, I always missed kind of like the part of management where you develop people. And so during the pandemic, I went back to uni, and I actually did a degree in systemic coaching. And we had a program in Google where I could actually apply that as a 20% project. I was coaching other people in Google in different roles. And I found that so rewarding that I found it harder and harder to justify spending most of my time and on UX. And it was definitely not an easy decision. I was going pregnant with that idea for several years, and I reached different points where I was like, okay, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to start my own coaching business now. And then I got pulled back into an interesting project or an interesting job, and I set it aside again. And then last year, I decided it is really time now. I'm so enthusiastic and so energized by coaching, by working with people and kind of like seeing those direct results that I wasn't really getting from my job in UX anymore, where obviously with more seniority, all of your projects become longer and longer and longer term, and it takes such a long time to see the results that I became too impatient, and I had this super strong pull factor. And then I was really lucky in that it coincided with Javier's leaving Google as well. And we have worked together for over a decade, 12 years at this point, on and off. But there's really profound trust between the two of us. And I know we share the same values and the same ideas about coaching and training. And I just really admire him as a UX researcher. So it's kind of like a no-brainer when he came up with this idea of like getting together and founding Astrolabium and doing coaching and training with user researchers, not just in Google, but outside as well.
Amazing. Thanks so much for sharing your story. And with that, I'd like to close our session today. First, thanks goes to the audience. You guys were so active and fantastic questions. I think I should have given you the mic from like minute 2 and not ask my question, but just let you ask Nina. It had such a good flow. So I'm really grateful for your activity. Thanks to you, Nina. I'm indebted. Amazing stories and a very insightful conversation. I'm very happy that you accepted my invitation and that you spent this almost over an hour with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast. It was really, really fun thinking about those things and kind of like having an audience for thinking out loud about them as well. Thanks for having me.
Ciao, ciao.